So now that we're all fully in the Christmas spirit, it's my turn to chair. I'm very excited about this. And as this is the last one of 2020, we've got an amazing guest joining us today. So Georgina, Twink, welcome to Women in Platforms. As you can see, we are a fully diverse bunch of people, and we have some men in platforms joining us as well. So, and my Robin. So, now I'm just going to start. Twink, you are, and get this right, founder of a business called White Marble Marketing. But I just thought I would ask the obvious question first of all. So we're going to look this evening at kind of marketing, branding, storytelling, lots of interesting things. What's been going on in the last year, and maybe some thoughts about next year. But could I just start? We'll use the usual format, which is a bit of a Q&A between the two of us, and then I'm just going to open the floor and attempt to multitask. And as people put questions in the chat, then we'll pick them up either as we go along or we'll come back to them. So feel free, lots of chat, let's go for it. But I have to ask you, where did you get the nickname from?
Yeah, well, that's where I need better storytelling from the off, really, and that
challenge number one.
It was from my parents. Twinkle cut short to twink, and then it stuck, and then went through school, and then my first job. It just was, there are lots of Georginas.
Well, it's very pretty, and we love it. I just thought I'd ask the obvious, because I'm sure everyone's thinking, is that her real name, or is it?
It was okay till I got married, and then when it got coupled with Field, Twink Field just sounds like, I don't know, somewhere you go at Glastonbury or something. So it all just got a bit weird.
Well, that's very cool and trendy. So on to more serious matters. Okay, I think it'd be really useful for everybody on the call for you to start by just giving us a little bit of your background in terms of the industry in general and how you got started and what roles you've had, and then we'll come on to talk about the business. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course. So I think perhaps the most relevant point to jump in at is when I've been was in house for about 15 years in an asset management company doing marketing. I started at Neptune 6 weeks after that company initiated, and there wasn't really any marketing. This was back in the early 2000s, and I've basically grew the team. They were very supportive of marketing, and I think that's something that's always quite interesting, which is the culture of the business and the tone that the CEO sets in terms of how powerful marketing can be. And I was very lucky that I was given authority, budget, and scope to grow and build the team, and I was there for 10 years and then left to go to Aberdeen, and I was there and I headed up European marketing for them before 6.5 years ago setting up White Marble with one main thought, really, which was that that not every company, and particularly some of the contacts I was talking to, some really brilliant boutiques, as well as some international asset managers, were really struggling to get strategic marketing advice at a time when they didn't need it all the time. They needed it at certain stages, at certain phases, but it wasn't necessarily the budget nor the desire to have that resource in their business all the time. So I set up the business in order that we could be this flexible plug-in to businesses so that they can prioritize projects and bring in the specialist insight, or indeed just resource. Sometimes they've got the strategy, and they just need the kind of people to be able to efficiently plug in. And I think quite particularly, through sort of volatile markets, people also quite like the option to be able to unplug, of course, but we like to talk about that less, clearly. But the kind of the two are important, and so we started out with that as a sort of core consultancy offering. We're now a team of 24 people. We have offices in Boston, in the US, and London. We have grown I think through the role that we've had doing these projects with clients on the consultancy side, often, we set out with a couple of those sort of boutiques and international managers in mind, and it's quickly been more broadly adopted right across the kind of the spectrum of different wealth managers, asset managers, as they're going through transition, or whether they're resource constrained or what have you. So it wasn't necessarily the model people used 7 years ago, but increasingly it's been adopted. But also because of the roles and relationships we've had with marketers over the time, we've often had quite a sort of mentoring and nurturing role. So that's then that led to our sort of learning courses, structured courses, helping develop talent within the asset management companies themselves as well, so that we can empower marketers either through us working with them or through training. And then we've also got a sort of insight and data part of our business as well, to be able to point to the effectiveness of what we're doing, which is also important to enable marketers to have that authority to demonstrate kind of the difference they're making.
Yeah, I mean, obviously thanks for that, by the way. The mentoring and learning piece is where I kind of first started engaging with you and helping out in some respects. And I just think that's an absolutely fantastic part of your business, because certainly I've worked in marketing departments in many companies in my career, and often what I think is that people join with a view as to what marketing is, but don't really understand what marketing in the asset management and financial services business looks like. And in the very old days, marketing was just pricing, and that's actually what it was. Interestingly, back in Standard Life days, marketing was run by the actuaries, because it was just about pricing and product. It wasn't about any of the things that we know and love today in terms of marketing. So I really love the fact that you do specific kind of mentoring and training for people that have joined, and thinking about how we market within a specific segment of the industry. And I think for me that was really exciting when I first started to engage with you in terms of what you're doing there. And attending for me a meeting where there was people from all different companies within asset management and financial services was really fascinating, because what they were not doing effectively is seeing themselves as competitors, but actually learning together. And that for me was really an exciting part of your business.
It certainly is. I mean, it's candid. It's not the most lucrative part of our business, but it's a really important thing aligned to our vision, which is about marketing being seen and in authentically a influential strategic part of our businesses. And some of that is educating the wider business, but also some of that is also a confidence thing that comes from knowledge, that comes from sort of talking to peers and feeling like you have some insights, some structured structured ways in which you can form your arguments, you can point to evidence, and a lot of it is in the individual to sort of assert that authority, which we try and unlock.
Yeah, I mean, what was exciting for me was also, certainly the session that I came in to join in, was there was lots of young people, which if I'm allowed to say that, it was which I find really exciting, because what you're doing, I think, is exciting younger people in our industry in a different way, if that makes sense, because that's certainly how I felt about the session that I attended. So
well,
that was fascinating.
I'd make one comment on that, maybe, which was back in the day when I was cutting my teeth, it was easier to just go out. I mean, it's obviously bloody difficult now, but it was easier to go out and be on advisor roadshows, meet your client, be much closer to the client. But over time, marketing has become less visible in person, I think, in front of the client in many cases, many asset managers anyway. They're not as encouraged to go out the door to meet and to work alongside their sales peers. They have to sort of be proactive about that. And so if you're a bit more hidden within your businesses and you don't necessarily go out and about and meet your peers and meet your customers, it's hard to learn, right? So
sure. Yeah, Absolutely, yeah. But when we were having a chat before this call, one of the things you said to me that really struck a chord was we talked about what is marketing, and you said that somebody had shared with you their thoughts on this about buying change. Do you want to share that with us? Because I thought that was really fascinating. It really made me think about what is marketing. What is it all about?
Well, I think it's funny because I think people think of marketing as being very soft, and I think it's come from a place again where, and this goes back to the C-suite and the senior management's view of marketing, and so I think there can be a tendency to think that it's quite fluffy, and not that transformational. But I think more than ever this year, we have seen the influence that marketing can have to help a business pivot to deliver a complete customer journey online. And whether you talk to people about, your client experience, what your brand stands for, brand equity you're trying to grow, how you differentiate yourself and position yourself, like they are they are the kind of key things in which you can kind of create an edge as a business. And so increasingly we recognize that when we're being asked to come in to help with projects, often it is to try and engender change within their business, often the way that the company is talking about themselves, expressing themselves, really truly identifying where their differentiation is, change in terms of how the customer perceives them, interacts with them. I think they're very powerful aspects of a business where marketing is taking a lead, and specifically now, where marketing is really looking right across that full client journey. That we have the data, we have the insights, we know what's driving people to either drop out or engage, or how far through the sales funnel they're going, what's making them go further, where they are in that funnel. That is the lead generation we're now creating, that we're now sort of revenue generating parts of the business as well. And so that is a kind of commercial driver that's putting marketing in a very different position. And it is very, back to me starting at Neptune in 2002, that's a very different kind of role and very different conversation that I have now today versus back then, because it was a bit more then about, so what's our creative look? What's our collateral like? It was a bit more in that support function. Whereas now a marketer is expected really to understand the regulatory environment, the customer need, to really interact right across, what the kind of product, get much more involved in the product development side. There's a much broader range, I guess, and interaction within the business and externally now that a marketer is essentially across. Yeah, mainly aligned to that client experience, which of course touches everything. So if a marketer is genuinely doing their role to drive the consistency, you have to be right across all those elements, both internally and then how that translates externally.
Yeah, so it feels much broader than certainly when I started, where marketing just did a brochure, right?
Yeah,
that was it. What did marketing do? Oh well, we're launching a product, or we're doing something different. Just get a brochure or a bunch of slides. And I think what you're describing now is actually something almost in a way much more scientific, as well as delivering the supporting collateral and everything that supports it. But it's a very different game now, isn't it, from where it was, say, 15, 20 years ago?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, I was trying to think the quote that's around, so I know 50% of my budget's effective, I just don't know which half. That kind of way of thinking has substantially changed, because we can really point to what's effective, because we've got the digital interactions. And so whilst you don't necessarily want everything purely digital, because we know that the combination of the physical and digital is very, very powerful. But still, we are much more insightful. We can be more data-led. We can make data-led decisions. We can then talk the language of the boardroom, right? So when the marketer then follows the FD and the sales director or what have you, we're not kind of going, oh, and here's the campaign kind of look and feel. Instead, we're talking numbers, we're talking about effectiveness, we're talking about how that's informing our next decisions. So I think you're right. I think it kind of blends a combination now, but I think we can just demonstrate our impact a lot more effectively.
Yeah, I've got a load of questions, but I'm actually going to take some as we go along. Brian, you've put a question in the chat. Do you want to come online there and ask?
Actually, I had a question, a comment. So Twink, this is a very interesting topic for me because I'm a marketeer. So I was brought in by Citibank from Kraft, from a consumer goods perspective, to bring some of that insight, everything from consumer insight to new product development, innovation, all that into the staid banking culture of Citi. And my question is actually around events, because I know how important it is to build a campfire, especially in your practices, to have people come and see what you can do for them and create some excitement and interest and so on. So my real question is around the events, but how do you see this kind of evolution that's happened with what you talked about, going from just the collateral coloring department to now a more sophisticated scientific approach? Like, how does all this fit together?
Well, I think so much of, and it's sort of picking up on a point I made earlier, maybe, which is the relationship with our sales colleagues. The sort of distribution approach is going to be really critical to what your client experiences and how competitive you can be. Because if those silos remain, then you are going to just get beaten. You are not going to be able to compete in the same way as your peers who are integrating, who are enabling marketing to do what they do best, and being respectful of what the sales guys do best as well, recognizing that the client journey weaves in and out between those teams. And it's about how you gather that data, how you build that client picture to be able to be more relevant. And I think relevance and authenticity are the areas where, and experience, frankly, those three things are the things where we talk to clients more and more and more. How are we relevant to the client, knowing where they are in the journey, supporting with what they want when they need it. And only by aligning that distribution team, recognizing the power of what each party brings and the disciplines they bring, can that really get to a really, really fantastic place. And it definitely varies in the market for sure.
So with your talent strategy, I don't know what your team is like, but do you bring in people from outside financial services, and what kind of skills and knowledge are you looking for?
Yeah, so a bit of both. So we have quite a few people from the industry, but what we've looked to do is build out a team that has different marketing skill sets. So if you want a specialism within the digital side, one of the people in our team was the head of digital at M&G, or if you want European strategy, we've got the ex-head of Europe from JP Morgan. So we've got some really senior people who can be very credible on the other side of the table in front of senior people. It's really that stakeholder management is so critical, so you don't kind of get caught out on technicalities, product knowledge, market knowledge, etc. But equally, within the team, sort of like, for instance, within the digital team, there's our kind of head of digital practice. She's only had a very short period within asset management. She really came from a telecoms background. And so, it is a mix. And I think things like on the creative side, that doesn't need, you don't need to come from an asset management creative team, for instance. But content, the team on the content side, it really helps to know product. So often it's easier if they've come from in-house somewhere, rather than, again, just get the terminology wrong, particularly when you're writing micro content and different channels. You've really got a few words to kind of make an impact.
Thank you.
I really like your analogy there of weaving in and out in terms of the customer, because I think sometimes the two seem to run more parallel as opposed to together, if that makes sense. you know, there's sales, and then there's or distribution, and then there's marketing. And I think sometimes we're not very good at joining the two together and working together. Certainly would be a perception that I have in terms of some of my experiences. Could we move on a little bit into, like, obviously the challenges of this year? You know, you've mentioned digital a lot. I mean, one of the things that's happened clearly is the pace of change with regards to digital has been forced as opposed to taking a natural progression, I think, if that makes sense. What do you think have been some of the key challenges for marketing, and what have we got right and wrong in the last year? Your observations would be really interesting.
So I would say that, interestingly, and just to touch on, you know, sales, to your point around sales and marketing feeling separate, this has thrust them together. And so if marketing was not visible prior to now, if it wasn't given that flexibility and authority, then early on in this process, then you definitely were behind. But you know, the sales guys have, you know, the relationship has got so, we're seeing them work together better than ever now.
Okay.
Because not only is it actually creating a better experience online, but also getting your comms out. You know, I think one of the things that the industry learnt through, you know, GSC and sort of that sort of volatility was that we were slow to respond. We didn't get the comms out quickly enough. That clients lost in that vacuum. Clients got anxious, and I know through talking to clients that the speed at which they galvanized, talked to each other, got some really strong client communications out the door was really exciting. You know, that under pressure, everybody pivoted, aligned themselves, thought about the client, and just really I know I feel quite proud, I think, of a lot of the clients that we've talked to, and non-clients as well, as to sort of how they manage their client relationships through that period, trying to reassure them.
Do you think we maybe went into a bit of overload though with some clients? I know, I mean, even I look at my own inbox with stuff and I'm just like, oh, delete. No, it's about how do we then make sure that we're really, back to words you said, relevant in front of the client? Because we're a bit inundated.
Well, I think if you're still sending out the kind of volume of mails that you were sending out at the beginning of, you know, now than you were sort of 6 months ago, you've definitely got it wrong. You know, people have been putting it back, but they were seeing the greatest interaction ever in their comms, many of them, than they've ever had before. I think people were looking for insight, opinion, and I think that's the point. Like, don't be generic and fluffy, be specific. Share an opinion where you have a voice and authority. Don't try and cover a kind of broad range of subject areas where people know you don't have credibility. Like, own the bit where you know you can genuinely have a voice, differentiate and express it in a compelling way. And then why wouldn't somebody read it? Try and make it simple and quick too. People are busy, they're frantic, they're fraught, they've got busy inboxes, they've got anxious clients themselves. Take the time to make it simple, because it is hard to do. You know, it's easier to write screeds.
I still massively agree with that. I still see too much content that looks like it's been written for kind of old-fashioned paper, and then we've just dumped it into a digital format. So all we've done is stuck it online and sent it out. And I think your point there on is stick to what is relevant and what people know you for, almost. Yeah. So, and I think, you know, I see a lot of sharing going on LinkedIn. You know, I mean, we can be guilty in our business where we've got an app where you can very easily share content. So some of the people in our business just share all the time, but it's not relevant to their role within the business. And actually, interestingly, we went through a phase where there was a leaderboard on how much we were all sharing. So it drove completely the wrong behavior, because people were sharing things to get up the leaderboard, not because it was relevant content. So, you know, you get what you measure, don't you, at the end of the day?
Well, and it's kind of lazy, isn't it, just to sort of share without kind of at least putting some kind of topper on it as to sort of why anybody should or that, you know, you actually discredit, you sort of go down, I think you're better doing less, making it personable, putting a snippet in that sort of encourages people, why are you sharing it? Be human with it, link real people, you know, it's sort of, I think that's a much more engaging way. And then you sort of ultimately, you become much more of an influencer that way, rather than just looking like you're a postbox.
Exactly. As somebody said to me once, you're not the 10 o'clock news. Yeah, this is not, you're not broadcasting a message, it's about engaging. And it's like, it feels kind of common sense, doesn't it? But all too often we see that that's not actually applied in terms of some of the content that we get. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think I think some companies could help their employees by being really clear around their policies, because often some people go, you know, whatever we do, we're going to send it out from the kind of the master brand. Everybody's got to like it and share it. Whether that's appropriate to your role, whether that's appropriate to the people that would be following you or interested in you, and I don't think it's always on the individual. You know, it's not necessarily their fault. It's they're kind of following what the missive is. Whereas I think the companies could be more helpful in engaging their teams in where they can add their voice, where they can be, you know, authoritative themselves. You know, share an opinion in an environment which isn't going to compromise the business.
Yeah, or if you're going to share something from the business and personalize it in some way, you'll pick out the 2 or 3 key points that are relevant, and then if somebody wants to read the detail, they can. So I still think there's a lot we can learn on sharing content. And I also sometimes, you mentioned content earlier, I find some of it, and maybe it's just because I'm really old-fashioned and I hate bad grammar and spelling mistakes and stuff, but I find it really difficult to find people that can write really good quality content. And I don't know if that's across the industry or if that's just kind of me being fussy.
Oh, it's a nightmare.
Yeah, it's
recruiting content people is a nightmare. We've taken ages to find the right people.
Yeah, what can we do about it, not just as an industry, you know, where does it start from, if that makes sense?
Well, I don't think I have all the answers to that, if I'm honest with you. But I think all we can do again is inform people around what best practice looks like and use data and evidence to sort of assert that, really. And I think I think sometimes people feel like their social media profile at an individual level they can carry over because it's just social is social, for instance. And so sometimes people are a bit casual about how they are in that environment because they're in their own social mode, if you like, and then they sort of carry that over. I do think it's difficult. People don't necessarily make arguments well anymore in terms of the content, and I think it's I think people find it hard to really find the story sometimes. And sorry,
that's okay. I was just going to go to Emma with a question, actually, if you're okay with that. Emma. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, it's great to see you.
You too. I was just going to ask that, so in my head, I've got, so certainly in the asset management space, I've got what I would call traditional, and imagining someone standing up at a seminar talking about, I don't know, a new fund range or something like that. In my head, I've got traditional, boring, 100 million slides, don't really mean anything. There's a lot of graphs and all that sort of stuff in there. And I have to say, for pretty much most of those sorts of presentations, I come away thinking, I actually don't know, you know, I was kind of doing my shopping list in my head because I lost the plot and I didn't understand. And I just wondered, from a marketing perspective, you're engaged to help someone with their marketing. How many times, if at all, do you then get overridden by the kind of boring old farts that say, no. What we want is a nice big brochure, and we want a slide or 50 slides that don't really say anything. And I just wondered if that happens.
Yeah. I would say we definitely try and find the balance between challenge. So I don't think we're doing our job if we haven't said what we think would be the optimal solution. And even having said it, if we get pushback, to not just gently challenge back and just say, well, that's absolutely fine. Of course, you can do what you want to do. It's your budget, it's your time, etc. I would just say that you will probably compromise the results in these areas because of not doing that, but understanding that if you want to carry on regardless, of course, that's your prerogative. But I think they kind of need to make the decision in the knowledge that of what they're letting go or what have you. So we try and encourage the team. And it's not easy for everybody to at all levels, if you like, to kind of push, just gently lean in. But we do try to do that, because it just ultimately, if it gets to a really crappy presentation that goes out and they come bottom of the kind of event, because not only is the presentation dry, but the presentation itself by the fund manager is even worse, or whatever it is, and so, you know, we then get associated with it. We try to avoid that.
It's also that piece, isn't it, around someone creating the slides for you and then somebody else them. And I find that really hard when someone else has created the slides, and there might be 50 slides where if you'd have done it yourself, you'd probably done it in 5.
Yeah.
But I'm old-fashioned as well, so.
Well, I think it's interesting. We do a lot of presentation work for clients now, because I think particularly as institutional wholesale markets are merging, that a lot of the more institutional players have gone, turns out our 60-page deck isn't what people want. And you know, this sort of fine print and this, it's just so heavy. It's because often it's because they can go, oh, well, if we just sort of flip it, they go, we like it because it's got everything in there and we can flip between it and all that kind of thing. And actually, and then there's sort of again, it's a sort of confidence thing that everything's at my elbow if I need it and I can point to a graph. But actually, again, if we can tell a really compelling story that's true, which is really helpful, because you're probably going to be then very powerful about it and consistent with it. And it's easy to remember. So you don't need loads of slides where you're going, oh, what's next? Instead, you're telling a story that has an arc with some supporting slides to it. And once you can kind of get them into that mode, they see the engagement figures go up, then you're sort of beginning to sort of turn the tide on it. It's not easy though. Yeah. They've got to want to change.
Can we come on to the interesting topic of ESG? Because that was something again we talked about in terms of how that fits in relation to brands and messaging. And I mean, let's face it, it has and is the hot topic, isn't it, of 2020 and beyond. So what's your thoughts on that? I know we had an interesting discussion about it.
Well, we did, and the thing that remains with me from a client, not a client, but a contact in Holland, was saying, who's brilliant at this, and they were saying, look, can you help us think about what's next within how we express our brand? And I'm like, what's next? They're like, yeah, because we know this isn't how we're going to be differentiating ourselves in 5 years' time. It will be in everybody's business, one way or another, how they're telling their story, where they are in terms of a journey against their vision. So what else should we be starting to unearth, unlock to provide sort of compelling differentiation? And it really struck me how brilliant some of these businesses are around thinking about what's next, where are we going, how do we stay relevant? And so I think everybody in one way or another is grappling with what the truism within their business around how credible they are. And it's It's interesting. I think investors respect much more you telling them where you are, even if it's behind, than trying to overclaim somewhere where you're not, because it harps back to this niggling doubt of trust within our industry. So I think, and that's quite a difficult human behavior to play with, because people naturally want to overreach a bit and overpromise a bit, and but we're nearly there, and you're like, well, you can talk about the fact you're nearly there, but why don't you also talk about where you are and what your vision is and what your journey you're on, because it's not a static thing. You're going to be somewhere different. So we talk a lot to clients about telling the truth, understanding what that truth is, but also setting a sort of point B as well, so that you can talk to clients about journey, what you're changing, why it's important to you, instead of getting some narrative around that people can share, and again people can feel comfortable talking to clients about, because it's those relationships can be kind of enduring over decades, and so people don't want to sort of misguide, mislead, or anything like that. So if you're giving people the honesty and you're talking about a sort of a future state, I think that's the much more important way of talking about ESG within your brand and your business.
Yeah.
I would also say, I think there are companies, and maybe this is stating the obvious, but there are clearly companies that are trying to be brands and businesses known for their sustainability, credibility, and there are others who are, we're not trying to be the next leader in this space, but we've got great product in this space. So you have those that are trying to deliver great product, and those who are trying to, and in many cases succeeding in living and breathing these values that informs their culture, their staff's behavior, how they retain and attract talent, how they kind of think about the products that they're building, evolving the ones they've already got. I think I think there are sort of a couple of camps there.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely, even just speaking from our own experience, everybody is still on a big journey with this one, in terms of how we position it with clients, but also in businesses like mine, where we've got advisors as well, as how do we position it in a way that they can take the messaging and translate that into sensible conversations with clients. And I do think that many of us have got a way to go still in terms of what we do and how we do it, but it's also about being seen to be actually walking the talk as well. Does that make sense in terms of the overall brand of the business? Yeah,
I think it does, and I think to some ways it sort of loops together a few of the things we're talking about, whether it's sort of Emma's comments around how we present ourselves, whether it's a brand level piece, or the sort of the content element. If we can point to evidence and sort of where we have done something, changed something, look to sort of do good or avoid harm, and we can pull out specific stories that you kind of want to tell your children. They're not sort of wrapped up in data and necessarily sort of kind of financial language, but I think of we've got our own ESG team who pull out a lot of what's going on in the industry and share it amongst our team, and every week we just do like a Jack and Nori corner, what's the story this week, and so we talk about mangroves or things like that, rather than I don't know, so, and occasionally obviously we sort of talk to the data around the kind of the risk return type sort of evidence, etc. So there's a blend, but I think it's really important to capture people's imaginations, to sort of think about this genuine storytelling.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic. I think you can cover like a number of sessions on it, but I do think in some areas we're still struggling, because some of it feels very easy to measure and some of it feels quite subjective.
Yeah. And
I think that's where the challenges come in right across the industry in terms of how we're all positioning this. And actually, maybe by the time we've all got our heads around it, we'll be on something different anyway. Because if you believe what you hear in ESG will just be integrated, just be part of what we do in the next few years, then the next thing is impact. So we we're all still, I think, on a massive journey with this one. So for me, it's always kind of one to keep an eye on. Amanda, you'd put a comment in the chat. Do you want to?
Yeah, I was just saying that some companies I've worked for, they see sales and marketing as very much one rather than completely separate, and marketing do help with the strategy. It's not, you're not just there for fluffing and colouring in and making presentations look nice, that you are there to create a need as well. So I think that works well when there's some joint ownership. So in terms of what you're trying to deliver.
I agree, and it's really exciting when you see that in evidence, that you're kind of really bringing out everybody's expertise. Yeah, no, it's, and I think more and more we see that too.
Helena doesn't appear to be, I think he's dropped off the call for some reason, but she put a really interesting question. I was waiting to see if she came back on, but she's asked a really interesting question on client communities. And she says there's a lot of brands that seem to focus on creating these internal communities that love what they do and talk about it, which is kind of rare in finance. Is that something you're observing, Twink, at all?
Sorry, I was just trying to find the comment communities.
Yeah, it just seems an interesting one for me.
So internal communities within their business.
Yeah.
Do we see that happening? I don't know. Maybe we wouldn't necessarily be as exposed to that.
Yeah.
Because it'll be their own functioning.
Yeah.
Oh, so sorry, that's my dog. 2 seconds. I'll just hang.
That's okay. It just felt like it was an interesting one for me, because I don't experience it within our own business. I don't know if anybody else does. She's run off, so we can't ask her what she was thinking about there.
Gillian, do you think perhaps she was thinking about understanding what their client actually wants rather than what we perhaps they want? Maybe that was the direction she was thinking.
Yeah, potentially, Paul. It's a good shout, because I do think certainly one of the challenges we often have as a business is actually still, I know we talk about it all the time a bit glibly, but I don't think we're very good sometimes at understanding the client still, and really making sure that what we design in terms of solutions meets those client requirements. I still think sometimes as an industry we just follow the herd, so everybody else is doing this and we need to catch up and do it as well. And I still think sometimes creative thinking isn't something as an industry we tend to be particularly good at. And how can we do that a bit better? Where do we get that creativity from, and where should we be looking for it?
Yeah.
Maybe that.
I think in the advisor community, a lot of the propositions that I see are designed for the advisor rather than the client, and I think that's where she's
possibly. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because somebody gave me some research recently that talked about women and said, we need to be better at creating propositions for women, and I'm like, that's an interesting one, because I'm not sure what that looks like in terms of the physical product, other than or how do we do the marketing around that? Because I don't want something that's pink and fluffy with a bow on it. How do we really think about women in that context and think about attracting them to financial services? I'd be really interested in anyone's thoughts on that one on the call.
We're talking about communities in Smart, actually, about getting people talking about money, so bringing people together that wouldn't normally talk, because we're not very good about talking about money in the UK, but in the US they're much better. And we're talking about creating communities for women. They've obviously been affected potentially more by COVID because they've become the carers, and sharing is enabling us to share content and get them talking about things that can help them as well.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, we ran an event about a year ago for women, and I was really astounded at the number that joined in, but also wanted to just really talk about their finances, and we're quite happy to share. And this was women not just in our industry, and it was absolutely fascinating. We could have talked all night, but they were really keen to just sit and discuss and really throw things around. It was absolutely fascinating. I don't think we do enough of that in terms of the industry. Carmel, you put a comment in there. Do you want to come on? And welcome. Thank you for joining us.
No problem. It's nice to see a few faces. I know. Yeah, so I was at Finimize for a really short period of time, and I still sort of tap in with them. And they're obviously a proposition for, you know, direct to consumer, but the community that they have is huge. It's 110,000 in the UK, and then nearly 1 million globally. And it is all done through events, and even they have moved over virtually to events really seamlessly, really easily. But what they also do, and they have quite interestingly, is they have lots of WhatsApp groups. They're just incorporating the tech all the time. I mean, obviously their users and their followers are predominantly younger, sort of 25 to 35, but the interest there in investing is really heavy and really strong. And I'm in a WhatsApp group with the women's group, which is mainly predominantly UK. And they have a book club where they read different kind of financial books, and they share conversations, and there's lots of sharing about, you know, which platform do you use, or what, you know, what are you doing trading wise, and, you know, I heard that this was happening with this stock, and, you know, there's it. And I think I used to always think through my work with Boring Money and previous consumer titles that, although I agree with you, pink and fluffy doesn't work, and we have to be careful not to patronize, but talking to women about things that affect only women, like maternity leave and living longer, and how you know, divorce might affect them worse than it does for their male partners for a certain demographic. I think it's important to talk to them about that, and bring that out, but otherwise it doesn't really need to be that different. And when I see that women's WhatsApp group and how they talk about investing and how they share about investing, it's no different to the other WhatsApp groups that with men in it. It's none at all. It's just they're getting more and more engaged, and it's just building that community and allowing that honesty and that conversation to feel fluid and allowed, and there's no right or wrong answers. And I think sometimes that finance prohibits that, the services, because we're always like, oh, compliance, you can't recommend that advice, and and it's like, but if the community recognizes that this is not a community of advisors and it's not advice, and it's this is what I use, then it allows a bit more freedom to talk about money and recommend. So it's a really interesting model. If no one's really looked at Finimize, then I suggest sort of having a little poke around and maybe going to some of their events, seeing how they do it.
Can I just make a comment? Because obviously I specialise in advice for women, and it's not that the advice is different. I completely get that. You know, they end up really with the same solutions, but it is the language, it is the journey that's different. And so much, women rely so much on communication, identification, and they you know, mansplaining is just, it's so rife in financial services. So it's not that we need to speak to women differently necessarily. We need to speak to everybody differently, I think, on occasions, you know, from a much more human perspective. It's not just about information, it's education and transformation. And I think the other two sides of the information piece is often missing. So you put information out there that consumers can't access because they don't know enough. And then if they do learn enough to access the information you're putting out there, they can't make it happen because there's a whole set of humanness that's just getting in the way of self. So, you know, it's that process as well. And I think that's where it can all fall down. And I don't think it's different for men. I think women are much more likely to admit they've got those problems and want to work on them. But I don't think it's actually different for men and women. I think it's just how you position yourself so as you communicate with people who are going to identify with you and trust you. So that's all marketing, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, Twink, what's your thoughts on that? Do you see people doing things differently or great examples of it?
We certainly have worked with some wealth managers in terms of helping them with some specific hubs, specific content, thinking about you know, the sort of the ways in which you engage. And I haven't been on those particular accounts. but you know, so much is in how I'm not sure I'm going to say anything different to Samantha actually. So I think it's absolutely how you engage with them, being you know, sort of ensuring that you are accessible to them, the tone's right, you know. I think so I know that there are, so I know that there are those out there kind of building specific campaigns, content journeys, client journeys that are very specific like that. I think the wealth managers are better than the asset managers, if I'm honest. I don't see many asset managers doing that in the same way, and maybe maybe they're not close enough to their clients to really know how to position themselves in a way that's truly going to be relevant to that particular persona. But they definitely, where the market is moving in is all based on that relevance point. Is you know, everyone says, right, we've got the CRM, we've got the data, it's about segmentation, it's about personas, it's about taking people on different journeys, and all of that is true, but the effectiveness of it is still being honed. You know, I think people are still kind of working out, well, there's quite a few different types within one persona group, and it is I think people are sort of trying to work out, how do we move from a sort of a kind of a comm strategy or a content strategy that goes to sort of one to the masses, to that sense of one-to-one. And I think with all the product range and all the different sort of clients that asset managers are trying to engage with, I think they're getting a little bit stuck in the middle there. Those user journeys are getting a bit jammed up, if I'm honest. They're not, they could be a lot better.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because obviously it's an area that I talk about quite a lot through the work that I do on intergenerational wealth transfer, which I could bore everybody rigid about, but I just love it. And this year we stopped towards the end of this year talking about always worrying about passing money to that next generation, because actually, you know, as we know, certainly the latest survey that I saw was something like 2/3 of the baby boomer wealth is in joint households, and typically the first point of transfer is in the generation that's moving at the moment is husband to wife. And the scary figure is that 70% of those women will actually change their advisor. So you clearly see, well, there's a huge opportunity for women that, for somebody who wants to build a focused proposition for those women who really need and want advice, but are not prepared to deal with the existing advisors, or equally an opportunity for advisors to think about, why am I losing those clients? Why are they walking out? Because actually what's happening is they're destroying, from an advisor perspective, the kind of future value of their business. Effectively. So you can do all this great IHT planning, but if the money walks out the door when the first partner passes away, then it's not a great position to be in. So it's a fascinating topic for me. So I might come to you to think about some help on customer journeys and what we can do differently to just engage that. But it's all about telling the story, isn't it? It's back to your point right at the front. If you can make your argument engaging and interesting and relevant, then people will stop and listen to you.
I think that's right. And again, I'm sure there are people better qualified than me to talk to this, but I would have thought that's also about, where does the relationship lie? And if the relationship starts with the husband with the advisor, and that's sort of kind of their relationship, then maybe the wife isn't feeling part of that, and they want to have a different conversation, and back to that sort of tone, accessibility, feeling they can ask the questions they want to ask, they don't feel stupid, etc. That it feels a supportive environment. That would be my. I just think there's a lot. You've got to start earlier, in the relationship, to sort of engage both parties potentially.
Can I just make another point about the whole the feminine viewpoint, and that is that I am absolutely stunned, moving from a traditional kind of wealth management business that I ran with my son, linked to accountants, so a mixed client bank, but mostly male, to be honest, to specialising in working with women. The socially responsible nature of the investing is almost complete in women's wealth. almost complete. There really aren't many women, and I do my absolute best not to shame anybody into going, you know, one way or the other on it. In fact, I'm keen to talk to them about the fact that their number one responsibility is to themselves and their planning and their family. But if they can afford to, if there is enough margin, you can go down this road and it has these effects, and you can, you know, overlay that. And they always do. And yet I wouldn't mind betting, well, I know from the wealth management business that the majority of those baby boomer portfolios are not socially responsibly screened. So, you know, that's the men leaving money to the women straight away. You know, my experience is they're going to want that change made. So
yeah, it's a really good point, Sam. I'm conscious of we've got about 5 minutes left, and Twink, one of the things we were going to very quickly talk about was some of the recent research. And I don't know if you can summarize it very quickly. I think there was some points that you thought you might be able to share.
Yeah, I mean, many of which we've kind of commented on today, but essentially I've recently spoke to 24 different global CMOs around what are the key issues they're wrestling with, what do they want answers to, and there's a whole broad range of things, and some are perhaps more interesting in this environment than others. So kind of quite one big thorny subject was the kind of global local, kind of how do you balance the talent, the specialism, drive efficiency, how with this sort of be as sort of local as you have to be necessary, you know, by necessity, rather than kind of put too much on the ground in terms of resource and move away from that sort of global sense of excellence. So there was a whole debate around that. This digital transformation, the data quality, I think, is a really interesting point, where you're as powerful as your data is clean. And there's a whole conversation around how can we get better confidence in our data, because a lot of them have moved from sort of 3 out of 10 in terms of data quality to about 6 out of 10. But there's so much reliance on the other partners around the business to really be able to be updating the data, to be getting that the full client view. I think what remains really difficult is stitching together the end-to-end journey. Like the digital data and the sales data still remains inherently difficult to completely lock up to get that full client view. But we are seeing certainly, you know, dashboards are evolving. People are putting themes in their dashboards they want to be known for. So back to the ESG point, people are really looking at the market. How are people thinking about our business and our brand? And are we moving forward the key themes that we want to be known for in brand? I think there's an acceptance that brand is back on the map in terms of being able to differentiate, that service is thought to be by far the most important thing to their customers, and kind of beyond performance. Like, I think it's about 4 times more important than performance. This was the kind of latest research that I saw. So people are really focused on the service that they're giving, so long as the performance isn't horrible. That you know, they're sort of, and this goes back to being informed, getting the comms out. Is it relevant to me? Do I feel like they understand me? And so all of these, you can see how all these things knit together to deliver the sort of client experience that really drives the brand positioning of your Pictets, your Abicos, your JP Morgans, that are consistently delivering on that front. Of Schroders, of course, as well, Gillian.
Of course.
But even like subtle things like that, so the pre-click, post-click, is that experience, and this is for anybody really, what you expect it to be. Back to your social posts, you're just putting something on there, up it goes, you happen to sort of intrigue somebody, click, and then you go to something that absolutely isn't what you're expecting to be engaged in. It's an immediate turn off, and it is, all of those hygiene factors are so crucial to how your customers are perceiving you, and whether you care, and whether you're thinking about the engagement, or whether they just feel like they're on some kind of automated sales funnel.
Yeah.
So it's got to be, you know, carefully done, I think.
Well, loads for us to think about, I think, then for next year. Yeah.
Well, I think so. I just on the Oh, sorry.
No, I just had lots of lessons there.
Certainly. And, you know, the digital transformation, definitely marketing is in the seat there. It's been seen as a part of these businesses that is driving change, that is putting sort of digital transformation through their businesses, onboarding technology that delivers the insight that can drive those decisions. And so, you know, marketers are very much, you know, pushing forward in that regard. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how our whole sort of world sort of evolves. And one interesting thing I was talking about is budgets, because obviously we're sort of budget season, looking ahead for next year. Curious as to sort of how they're all thinking about, sorry, I'm overrunning myself.
Okay.
Their sort of 2021 budgets, and predominantly they're flat, some are up, but the only bit that's changing is the event strategy, because
interesting,
that's such a big part of the budget. So when you take quite a lot of that out, your budget may go down, but a lot of them are holding on to it.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us. Amira put a question about CRM systems and which one's the best. So can I suggest, if anybody's got some comments to Amira?
They're as good as your input is.
Yeah, I thought you'd say that.
Well, all that's left for me to say is thank you for sticking with us this evening. It's been fascinating, Twink. It's been lovely that we could get you to join us, and maybe we repeat it next year to work out how we have moved as an industry throughout 2021, because clearly lots more change to come. Very quickly before we sign off, Women in Platforms is obviously closing now for Christmas. And next year, what we're going to do is move to a monthly basis to start with for the first quarter anyway, see how that goes, and think about all the topics that we want to cover. So we will drop a note out to everybody, because I can't remember the date of the first session. I think it's mid-month that we're going for. And as Heather's had to drop off and Rose is in flight somewhere sunny, then we will keep you posted. But we just decided that we would start to move towards monthly, as we hopefully move towards life as we know it or knew it. So when we can all meet face to face again. So thanks for supporting us throughout this year. It's been great fun. We've had some great topics, great speakers, and have a lovely, lovely Christmas. Stay safe and well. Enjoy New Year. And yes, Sam's still blue. And we shall see you soon.
Thanks, Gillian. Happy Christmas, everyone.